Let's bring into the conversation now Ivo Daalder. He's former U.S. ambassador to NATO. He's currently the president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Ambassador Daalder, I really appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
First, let me just give you a chance to respond to some of what we heard from Richard Engel there and from some of the way that I laid this out. I don't expect you to agree with anything that I said, of course, but I'm just wondering if you are seeing this along the lines that Richard is seeing, that Vladimir Putin is going to want his endgame here to be a subcontractor, to be effectively a pro-Russian regime that he can control without having to directly occupy Ukraine from across its vast borders with Russian troops.
Yeah, I do see it the same way. And frankly, I think you laid it out really, really well about what Putin is all about and what he's trying to do here. And I think Richard did as well. I do think that he's looking for a puppet. This is always about being in control of Ukraine, hopefully in a cheap way in which you don't have to invade a country. Now he has had to invade because, frankly, it was the only way in which he could achieve his goal. But pushing a little further, just as you did in the conversation with Richard, yet he has to occupy the country in order to install his puppet. And then what? Because the puppet no longer has control of the Ukrainian state. 8 years of democracy. In fact, there has been democracy before that. Years of democracy, but most importantly, years of fighting Putin. 8 years the Ukrainians have been fighting Putin, and the Ukrainian nationalism is now real. And the idea that, putting a Yankukovych-like figure in charge isn't enough. You also need to control the state. And I think the biggest miscalculation he may have made is that he thought this was going to be easy. And in fact, he swallowed a really big country that is trying to get out. And we will see, I fear, significant guerrilla-like warfare in the coming months after the occupation has taken place.
If Russia does take control of Ukraine and its entire territory, whether or not that lasts long, we would be in a situation in which, over the border with Poland, say, and over the border with several other nations, you would have NATO and indeed, in some cases, U.S. forces right butted up against any Russian forces that were held in place to hold that territory. How dangerous is that? As a former ambassador to NATO, knowing that NATO is holding its emergency summit tomorrow to talk about these things, knowing that President Biden has talked about the Article 5 responsibilities of the United States being ironclad and absolutely sacred. How dangerous would it be for even a temporary situation to have Russian troops up against NATO borders at a very volatile time?
It'd be very dangerous, to be honest. This is what you worry about: escalation of a conflict that is not confined to Ukraine but goes beyond it. And in fact, remember that Putin's screed that we heard on Monday wasn't only about Ukraine. It was mainly about Ukraine, but it was also about the unfairness in which Russia and the Soviet Union have been treated. And in some ways, this idea that we need to sort of reconstitute the post-Cold War order. He does, as President Biden said, doesn't only want to reestablish the Soviet Union. He also wants to establish the real influence over Central and Eastern Europe. Those countries are now members of NATO. And as a result, just as you said, if Ukraine gets taken over, just look at the map. The Baltic states, Poland, Romania, Hungary, the Slovak Republic are all going to be bordering on Russian forces. And the only way I think we can prevent war, and my sense is this is what's going to be talked about tomorrow in this virtual meeting of NATO leaders, is a significant plus-up of U.S. and NATO military forces in the East to remind Vladimir Putin that however he may have miscalculated what he's doing in Ukraine, don't calculate that there is a way to go any further, because then you're at war not just with Poland or not just with Lithuania, you're at war with the entire NATO alliance, 30 nations strong, led by the strongest military power on earth, which is the United States. And no matter how much you want to threatened about nuclear war or whatever, the reality is that the U.S. still has the capacity not only to defend NATO, but to do serious, serious harm on Russia if that were to ever to be necessary.
Ivo Daalder is the former U.S. ambassador to NATO and is currently the president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Mr. Ambassador, I really appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you for your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks.